Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Delivering on the Promise of BOPIS and Other Omnichannel Realities. I'm Adam Blair, the editor of Retail Touchpoints, and I'll be moderating today's session, which is part of our Connected Consumer series of web seminars. Today's consumers are expecting and even demanding flexible order and pickup options. While research shows that a large number of retailers are expanding their offerings for BOPIS and other fulfillment options, most brands are struggling with actually executing on delivering a shared cart across channels. A big reason is inventory inaccuracies. In fact, recent research shows that 66% of retailers said this factor made their buy online, pick up in-store service offerings inconsistent. During today's webinar, we'll get a deep dive into why retailers are still struggling to align the data and insights needed to provide seamless omnichannel inventory offerings, as well as a use case example of how a top brand is using machine learning and AI to know what, when, and where each SKU should be in the retail supply chain to optimize omnichannel inventory. Speakers today are going to be sharing lots of information about this topic, and we encourage you to share some of your own data points and takeaways on Twitter using our Connected Consumer series event hashtag. Social information from me and our speakers is available on this slide. For you who may be new to Retail Touchpoints, here's a quick overview. We're an all-digital media company publishing 3 weekly email online newsletters, daily news, special reports, and multimedia presentations. We also host the annual Retail Innovation Conference in New York, which will take place May 6th through the 8th, 2019. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to our weekly newsletter. We welcome input and feedback through traditional means, phone and email, as well as social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Our website is www.retailtouchpoints.com. Speaking of the Retail Innovation Conference, we have a special sweepstakes for this series. Attendees can win prizes like Apple AirPods, Starbucks gift cards, as well as free tickets to our annual Retail Innovation Conference in New York City, which, as I said, takes place May 6th through the 8th, 2019. Each of you watching has already earned one entry into the drawing by registering for this session. And if you're attending this webinar live right now, you'll receive a second entry as well. Throughout the series, you'll earn one entry for each CCS 19 webinar you sign up for, and an additional entry for each session you attend live. We'll be giving away a total of 5 free tickets, and we'll be announcing a winner each day of the series. So be sure to stay tuned in all week long for your best chance to win. For today's presentation, we're using the On24 platform. Right now, you should be viewing the On24 dashboard, which shows the live viewing screen. By clicking on the Questions widget on the right-hand side of the screen, you can type in questions during the live presentation and press Submit. You can also find a widget named Resources under Questions. Here you can download assets our presenters have provided. All you have to do is click on the resource, and it will automatically download. In addition to joining the conversation online and submitting your questions here, we also welcome and encourage you to participate by letting us know how we're doing. In an effort to constantly improve the level of value we provide to our audience members, we put together a very brief survey that will automatically launch once the webinar session ends. However, you can pull up, complete, and submit the survey at any time during this webinar by clicking on the survey icon in the taskbar on the bottom of your screen. You can see the survey icon circled here in black on this slide. Before signing off today, please take a moment to complete this quick questionnaire. We appreciate and value your feedback, and we look forward to hearing from you. Now just a few housekeeping details. The presentation is slated for about 30 to 40 minutes with time for live questions at the end. I encourage you to submit those questions as they come to mind, so they rise to the top during the Q&A session. We'll get to as many questions as we can, and I also encourage you to follow up with our speakers on social media if you want to discuss some of the session's takeaways. Also, the webinar is being recorded, and all attendees will receive an archive link to the presentation to go back and review or share with colleagues. You'll also have access to the slide deck through SlideShare. Now I'm very happy to introduce our speakers. Kevin Stadler is responsible for the continued strategic expansion and overall operations of 4R. He has over 25 years' experience in retail technology, product strategy, sales, and software design. Prior to joining 4R, Stadler was head of customer engagement solutions for Symphony EYC, responsible for leading the product direction and business activities worldwide for the company. We also have Antony Karabus, who is CEO of HRC Retail Advisory. He's been a trusted advisor to retailers on strategic and financial performance improvement issues since 1990, assisting more than 100 North American retail chains to create significant shareholder value. Antony began his career at Arthur Andersen in Cape Town, South Africa, and transferred to the firm's Toronto, Canada office in 1987. He established Karabus Management in 1990, which developed and grew into one of North America's leading specialist retail consulting firms over the next 20 years. In 2008, he sold the firm to an international accounting/consulting firm, where he served as the leader of that firm's retail consulting services practice until December 2011. Antony and his partner acquired a Chicago-based competitive firm in 2012, which formed the foundation of their current firm, HRC Retail Advisory. Antony leads HRC Advisory's proprietary retail P&L benchmark service, which comprises granular-level material, non-public financial, and operating performance benchmark information on almost 60 North American retail chains. Welcome to both our speakers. I'm going to turn it over now to Kevin.
Thanks, Adam. So we're here today to talk about BOPIS and ROPIS, meaning buy online, pick up in store, or reserve online, pick up in store. The reason why we want to talk about this is because there is a huge rush to offer this capability by many of the bricks and mortar retailers that are out there. So Antony and I are going to talk about what it takes to do it right, the benefits, but we're also going to talk about the pitfalls and the risks so that you get a clear view of what you're getting into as you look at offering this type of capability. It's pretty obvious at the start when you look at BOPIS why you would do it. It's a very effective strategy against a pure online offering if you are a bricks and mortar operator. All of the indications are that it also increases customer satisfaction and stickiness with that retailer due to immediate availability of the product. And by extension, increases store traffic because the consumer actually comes to that location to pick up. Margin is increased, mainly because there's not shipping involved in it. And when done right, and I'd emphasize when done right, it reduces stranded inventory throughout the supply chain and specifically inside of the store. What Antony and HRC has done is apparently a survey that tells us a little bit about how big this demand is. Antony, would you kind of give us an overview of that?
Sure, with pleasure. Thank you, Kevin. So our firm interviewed in late 2018 executives from 30 retail chains across North America. And as Kevin has said, over 80% of retailers, we learned, have offered their customers some level of omnichannel capabilities. What we were trying to do is understand the implications to customer experience and to the retailer's profitability. And that was a key part of the study that we did. It's absolutely clear that BOPIS is a really good weapon to compete against the pure play retailers because consumers are expecting faster and faster delivery and putting enormous pressure on retailers to meet those expectations. Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah, and as we talk through some of the different components that we've got here, I think it's fair to say not only are lots of people doing it, but they're exposing the pitfalls or the risks involved with BOPIS. So when you think of this kind of an offering, first off, while it has great promise to increase customer satisfaction, failure to fulfill this particular offering is a much higher risk, much higher than an out-of-stock in-store would occur if you can't fulfill. Second, incorrect forecasting and inventory can increase carrying costs. In other words, if you do not do your forecasting of the two different ways of looking at that inventory in store and the demand, you can actually have to pump up your in-store inventory and your investment, therefore, by quite a bit. The localized online demand signals can interfere with store demand and the forecasting, and localized fulfillment increases variation in the inventory and the store order points, meaning that in many cases it almost drives the need for a more agile supply chain and what may be needed there. Antony, I know the survey had some components of this as well. I was wondering if you could speak to some of the things that you found through actual survey.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, it was very interesting. 100% of the retailers that we spoke to are experiencing significant operational and execution challenges. more than 80% of those are disappointing customers while increasing the costs. Shipping inefficiencies is a very significant part of this process. But the other part that is causing the disappointment is that the stakes have now been raised in terms of accuracy of inventory, and as a result, over 80% of retailers are not effectively fine-tuning their allocations to store-level local demand. And that is really because they are not effectively attributing e-commerce BOPIS demand to the stores that the customers are requesting the pickup at. Interestingly, only 14% of retailers are using predictive analytics to date that we interviewed, and virtually all of them are struggling to, integrate this wonderful new analytics into their operational practices and haven't figured out how to use it. Thanks, Kevin.
So we've talked a little bit about both the promise and the pitfalls, but let's break it down a bit as to exactly why this is both a great thing to offer and at the same time has some problems with it. The main reason why, if you look at it from the first high level, is we're actually talking about two different demand pools. We're talking about what is store demand, and then we're also talking about what is BOPIS demand, which is a localized online demand. And these interact. They can either be cannibalistic or have halo effect on each other. And so we need to look at them just a little bit differently than probably we would have looked at most demand signals in the past. So the two demand streams need to be integrated and the risk factors taken into effect. Now, the reason why this is important is because, as we discussed at the top, the BOPIS demand has higher risk. Now, what we mean by that is because the consumer purchased something online and it was promised or expected at a local store, disappointing that consumer actually loses a lot more long-term customer value. If a consumer just showed up in store and there was not a stock, certainly not something that we want to occur, but it doesn't carry quite as high a risk factor as it goes through. So the techniques that need to be used here for this integration of approach need to factor in the following. It needs to look at what is each demand stream, what is the risk on each one, and also calculate out whether it's cannibalistic or halo as it goes through. Legacy systems can cause a lot of inaccuracy with this. The reason why we look at predictive analytics and artificial intelligence to help us with this very complicated view. The existing supply chain, as it goes through and existing ERP systems, look at it as a target service level and a solution as target service level either at each one or differently. The target service level in theory is supposed to account for some of that risk, but since we're talking about blended risk, in effect what happens instead is you use the existing techniques and you offer BOPIS, it causes a bullwhip effect. It causes an overreaction and an underreaction as it goes through, both causing increased risk and at the same time increased supply chain costs. Just want to give you a quick view of kind of a multi-echelon supply chain and what that overlap is. If you look at the shaded pool up to the upper right in the diagram, what you actually see is that the retail demand and the direct demand are pulling against one exact same resource, which is store inventory, but typically they're accounted for differently as you look at the supply chain. So what we need to do is figure out a way to integrate in those two views and understand the risk of them separately. Let me take you through a technique at a high level that we at 4R use to how you look at integrated demand and risk models. So what you are seeing in terms of the diagram is a balancing of risk return and the basis of what is the demand signal differentiation. So for each of the different potential points that you could offer inventory at whatever units, we basically take the deviations, go high and low, and we take it all the way down to the different demand signals. So you will look at this both as in-store, and you'll also then look at, on top of it, what is the BOPIS demand at that particular location. The risk is factored in, and then we play through that model through an extremely high level of inventory, which is on the lower right-hand portion, or an exceptionally low amount of inventory at each of these locations. And it shows you the case of, as you obviously put in less inventory, you're sure to capture all of those sales. If you put in way too much inventory, what happens is you have increased costs, and at the same time, you lose profit as it goes through. So for each inventory level, we're going to play through each of these, and we're going to do it at the lowest level. And they're calculated separately first, and then we go in to factor them together. An interesting component of this technique is what's illustrated in the green on the top. After you take that technique and then you add in the cost of inventory and risk for each one of those different locations, the picture emerges, which is what at each inventory point for each location that we're talking about with the integrated demand is the profit optimal level. You're going to notice that that curve drops off after a certain point in time, and that's because of the increased cost of the inventory. It also, on the left-hand side, moves down. Now, these curves for each item, obviously, are very different. A more seasonal item has a much more parabolic curve. A steady day-in, day-out item might have a little bit more of a flatter curve as it goes through. But there's a couple of things that are important here, which is once you use this technique, you can add up different demand streams, and you can add up risk, and you can look and find out and goal seek against what's the most profitable level as you need to go through. This is also important because as you look at it, you can determine what is the correct inventory position and strategy that you need as an organization. It also can be modeled against the current retailer capability and execution to show where it is at, so how far off of the curve you are as it goes through. This technique works exceptionally well because it's goal-seeking. You don't have to do target service level manipulations for each of the different demand streams, each of the different inventory points, and it reacts quickly. The reason why that's important is because once you introduce BOPIS into an existing demand stream and on-store demand, those other older systems of target service level create a bullwhip effect. They overreact and underreact to each of the different locations as it goes in. And what you obviously want is a smooth capability and a smooth delivery so that the customer doesn't see what's going on relative to how you're having to catch up each time. The benefits of integrating demand and risk models for BOPIS allows for risk pooling, and this is key. Because it has both of those different aspects of a localized online demand, and it can pull and can be cannibalistic to store, on the inventory side, that's actually an advantage because you can keep more inventory at a smaller number of central locations until the demand materializes and push it out. And you can fulfill them more surgically in stores instead of fragmenting across many bricks and mortar locations in anticipation of uncertain future demand. This drives lower costs, gained efficiency, and what is even more important to a bricks and mortar retailer is this risk pooling as it goes through in the efficient frontier drives better overall margins for the total organization instead of the same amount of inventory pushed in a non-optimized or a non-pooled capability. So what you're seeing here in terms of the curve to the left is that efficient frontier has shifted for that bricks and mortar retailer with offering BOPIS by giving them a lower level of risk for the same amount of inventory but actually filled more optimally at each one of the endpoint locations. Kenny, I know that HRC has looked at BOPIS as part of this and has looked at some different recommendations. I wonder if you could comment on a few of those.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kevin. So the single most important thing that we believe is needed is to carefully define the role of the store in omnichannel. As Kevin and I both mentioned earlier, retailers have rushed out to launch omnichannel and haven't been as clear as they should have been with defining what the role of the store is, what the expectation of the sales folks are, what the turnaround time is, how they're going to incentivize store associates to, pick and pack and get the omnichannel order ready for the customer. The second big recommendation is to get clarity on integrating inventory across channels. Inventory is, as we all know, is a critical weapon, but it's also a very risky item in that if inventory is not carefully understood and there's not good enough visibility, it could end up stranded. The third thing, which it really speaks to what we've been talking about, is to use predictive analytic techniques to get clarity on demand signals. Understanding local customer demand is one of the most critical ingredients for success. Looking at all of your inventory touch points from the beginning all the way through to the end of the supply chain are critical, because the stakes have been raised in terms of inventory accuracy. If the customer is expecting a 32 pair of pants in a particular style at a particular day in a particular store, that risk has been raised significantly of accuracy, because if the system says 1 and it allows the BOPIS order, and there's a high risk that there's in fact that pair is in fact not in the store, it's going to disappoint the customer. So getting clarity on accuracy is extremely important. And last but not least, defining a scorecard so that you know, are you making money? Are you disappointing your customers? Are you fulfilling the promise? Is very critical. And frankly, we have not seen one retailer that has an effective scorecard for omnichannel. In closing on this slide, omnichannel is not an alternative. It is now a standard to compete. The question just is how to make sure you do it effectively. Thank you, Kevin.
So, if you look at all of this as an audience participant today and those listening, and you are a bricks and mortar retailer and looking to offer this kind of capability, it's pretty clear from what Antony has said and what the industry is saying is this is quickly becoming table stakes. It is a must. And the point that I think we would make is that if it's something that you have to do, and there is a bonus to it for doing it, why wouldn't you take the time to do it right? And if you do the techniques we're talking about with both Antony and I relative to predictive analytics, doing the correct techniques, it can solve for the risk that's involved with this offering, increasing customer satisfaction, increasing margins, decreasing supply chain costs overall, and decreasing overstock risk in the total supply chain. So you can see that not only would this be an effective strategy against a pure e-commerce player, but done right, it can actually become not just an individual weapon against and an offering against an e-commerce retailer only, but at the same time, it can increase overall your company strategy and your efficiency as you go through if you do it right and do some of these different techniques. I believe we have some time for some questions, so I will hand it back over to Adam.
Well, thank you, Kevin. Yeah, we do have time for some questions. Great insights from both of you, but we have definitely gotten some questions in, so I'm just going to dive in. Kevin, I think this one is directed at you. Is there a way that I can tell how far off my inventory is today at store level, and what are some ways to improve it? I guess they mean to make it more accurate.
Certainly, yeah. So there's a couple of interesting answers in here. Because of the big data, predictive analytic, artificial intelligence approach we're talking about, it has the added benefit of being a modeling environment. Now, what I mean by that is you can actually look at historically what has been done and play it through the models against optimization and create the business case to say, here's how much inventory should be at each of these locations. This is what was actually done as it goes through. So that's first off. There is a way to do that. There is a way to tell exactly what the investment would be or what the overall improvement would be. That's first off. Second, in kind of day-to-day operational use, these predictive analytic techniques have the capability of looking at the demand signals in the inventory and identifying issues. Now, what we mean by issues is we term it internally phantom inventory. So there are cases to where inventory count is off in any of the different locations, and there is some inaccuracy that then pinpoints what you need to do. These techniques identify down to a demand and fulfillment location where things are in error. There used to be an old joke when it comes to inventory accuracy is that if you want to get an inaccurate inventory count, just count it. And the problem is, obviously, if you count everything, you usually get some things wrong. This technique allows you to just count the items that are needed and just pinpoint those ones. So again, two different techniques: high level on figuring out what you need to do, and then low level operational use on actually taking action.
Great. Okay. Very helpful stuff. All right. Anthony, I believe this one is for you. It's a general question. What are some of the industry best practices for BOPIS?
Thank you. The number one would be to develop a very clear plan at each step of the way as to what your expectations are and who has what roles and responsibilities in the omnichannel journey, so that we can ensure that we end up with the result that we hope for. Second piece one is very clear communication as to roles and responsibilities. The third is to ensure inventory accuracy at store level, and in the case of apparel, at a size and style level. That is a really tall order, as we've discussed. But inventory inaccuracy is the number one predictor of disappointed customers when they show up at the store. So that is absolutely critical. The fourth one is clear attribution of store-level local demand so that you can improve your allocation and replenishment at store level to ensure that customer demand at store level is more accurately attributed. The fourth one is, to clearly ensure that the store-level associates understand the expectation of them when a BOPIS order shows up on their screen, so that they can ensure that when the customer comes in, the order is waiting for them, nicely packaged up, and that they have potentially some complementary items so that they can upsell the customer when they come in. Those would be sort of some of the initial practices that I believe are worth mentioning.
Great. Yeah, that sounds great. So it sounds like overall it's about communication, making sure people are assigned to the correct roles, and also setting expectations and training. So it's a big job, but that lays it out in a great way. I appreciate that. All right. Kevin, this one looks like it's for you. Are there any smart ways to augment my existing capabilities so I can improve profitability of my BOPIS operation?
Yes. It's an interesting thing, and I'll give you an analogy on this. The types of offerings that Anthony and I are talking about are predominantly, and at least for this is true, is that it's a cloud-based architecture. What we mean by that is we pull information from the retailers and optimize it inside of a cloud environment. So the modeling occurs, the predictive analytics occur, the artificial intelligence occur within that cloud and gets fed back into the retail system. The analogy there would make is for any house, if you have a perfectly good heating, ventilation, air conditioning system, but are using an older thermostat, obviously by just attaching one of the new smart thermostats, like a Nest thermostat, you get a lot more efficiency for a lot less cost just by putting that piece on top. And that's exactly the analogy of what happens with this kind of capability, particularly with BOPIS. This new technique takes the data, does all of the modeling, looks at all of the analytics that need to be involved, and then can pump right back into the existing ERP or inventory capability that the retailer has without having to do a rip and replace. And I think that's important because we're wanting, as retailers, we would want to quickly offer this capability without the risk, but we don't want to do the 3 to 5 year ERP implementation to get there. So this kind of a way can actually get you up and running quicker through cloud-based optimizations, weekly re-optimized, and then injected right back into the existing system. Also allows for the ability to not have to do large operational changes and allows you to integrate it right into existing practice.
Okay, great. Thank you. Here's a question for Antony. The HRC survey indicates that it looks like BOPIS is absolutely a necessity, but I just don't know where to start. Can you give advice on how to get there quickly and with as little risk as possible?
Absolutely. The number one thing I'd do before launching it is develop a very clear plan as to exactly what BOPIS is, exactly how we're going to implement it, who is responsible for what at every step of the way. And that'll ensure that we mitigate the risk of confusion at any step. The number two issue is inventory inaccuracy. Again, as Kevin said, there's always going to be inaccuracy. But because the stakes have been raised significantly, we need to determine what level of accuracy we can live with. And one of the ways in which you could get it started quickly is to only turn on BOPIS onto a limited number of stores so that you can control or mitigate the risk of accuracy or disappointments. Maybe one store in every market, as an example, until you get it right. We want to ensure that there are clarity about all the Omni-related decisions we've made and ensure that all the stakeholders have clear communication: merchandising, MP&A, supply chain, stores, and IT. These, essentially what it is building a very executive level BOPIS plan and executing against it so that when you roll it out, you don't lose money and upset your customers. Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, it looks like we just have time for one more question. Kevin, I think this one is directed to you. The person is asking, if I do offer BOPIS, does that mean I'll have to make a substantial investment in inventory?
Yeah, it's a great question. In working with our different clients, my answer would be, it depends. I'll explain why and some different ways to look at it. So in many cases, because of the BOPIS being an online kind of a demand which is localized, and it's also pulling against an in-store amount, if the in-store has a current safety stock or what we'll call a presentation minimum level, which is exceptionally high, it can be that actually it does not increase at all, and in many cases, after they're set correctly, could decrease. Now, alternatively, if the system is running exceptionally lean, it could indicate that offering BOPIS in that demand sequence could mean an increase in inventory in certain locations as it goes through. And I'll just point out that there's one other interesting part of quote-unquote thinking about investment as it goes through is one of our clients looked at the situation and the reason why they were having, let's just say, problems with delivery against that integrated signal was because they did not, their lead times were too long relative to their supply chain. So what they actually invested in was what we will call a hub and spoke capability, to where there was a mini hub in closer locations on a localized basis that could actually feed inventory in more surgically as needed. And that offering that supply chain capability was actually less cost than having to use the existing capability and loading in more inventory overall. So I'd say it's all across the board about the investment, and there are different ways to mitigate, and it does point to increased strategy. In general, done right, it does not have to lead to a substantial investment in inventory.
Great. Okay. Well, I want to thank Kevin and Antony for the great insights. I want to thank the attendees for listening to the webinar. I'd also like to encourage everyone to attend the Retail Innovation Conference, which, as I said, is going to be May 6th through the 8th, 2019 in New York City. And if you're looking for more information, you can find it at www.retailinnovationconference.com. If anyone did not receive an answer to their question, the speakers will be available to follow up after the presentation. And I encourage everyone to get the scoop on all the different BCS sessions by going to the link that's on the screen now. Again, thanks for attending, and have a great day.